Okay, this video is to demonstrate how to set up a Krones Labeler Contiroll vacuum drum. Specifically, how to set these pads up. These are your vacuum pads on a drum, and they have to be set up using an indicator gauge similar to this. Tools that you're going to need are going to be the jig that determines the distance from your cutter drum to the shaft that the labeler vacuum drum actually mounts to. You're going to need a long screwdriver, thin flathead. You're going to need this to actually get to the dial to adjust the settings. You're going to need a 5mm Allen wrench. This one has been cut down a little bit shorter in order to make it easier to get inside here to adjust the bolts. Okay, I'm going to talk about this particular setup right here. Every single one of these machines is going to have a gauge that is mounted to it specifically for the machine. So for example, this one right here happens to be for our large line labeler. That is what the LL designates. This distance has been set up previously. You take this, you drop it on a shaft, such as this right here. This would represent the shaft in the machine. It can only go on one way. These four sides are not equidistant, so if it doesn't fit on one way, you have to rotate it until it drops on, such as this. So once this is in the machine, this will be adjusted to it actually gets within 2mm of the cutter. You would measure that with a feeler gauge. That has been done already. Once it's been done, you'll tighten up these bolts. As you can see right here, there is a pin that has been pinned, and we also match marked it to ensure that none of these have ever changed since that work's been done. Once it's been done, you could utilize this tool to set up your dial indicator standoff as well as verify your glue roll settings. So for this job, what we're going to wind up doing is we're going to have this jig set up in the vise. When it is set up in the vise, you have to make sure that down here, this part that rotates is not contacting the jaws in the vise. You can see a few times here somebody has installed this thing in the vise and it's contacted. That's no good. I also want to talk about safety of this tool itself. When you're installing the vacuum drum onto this shaft, you have to ensure that this safety piece is in its proper location at the top right here. It keeps these pins from sticking out too far and you inadvertently getting it caught on that drum and snapping these off. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn both of these on. These are digital, and we're going to zero out these calipers, these indicators, to this jig right here. Okay, so we're going to take this on, drop it on the shaft. You can put it on upside down or right side up depending on whatever you need to do. So right now we're going to do the bottom. We're going to take this collar, we're going to raise this up so that it is right at that point in the center of this and resting on it. And then we're going to find the high spot on this. So right now I'm rotating this thing. If you notice that it appears that the high spot, we're at 0.001 negative, and that appears to be the highest point, meaning that is the closest to zero. So what I'm going to do is get back to that 0.001 right there, and I'm going to hit zero. That is now zero. So every time I move this past this off the center, it goes negative there. It's going to come as high as zero. When I go back, it's zero. And if I go the other direction, it goes negative as well. So I now have this zeroed. So we're done with the bottom one. I have to do the exact same thing for the top. So I'm going to move this out of your way over here. I'm going to loosen this lock collar on the bottom and raise this up so that it lines up with the indicator. I want to lock it down. So at this point, I'm rotating this till I find the high spot. Appears to be the same thing, negative 0.001s or negative 1,000s, roughly. That's as close to 0 as I can get, so I'm going to hit 0 right there. So that is now 0, this is 0. I verified that I can get it back to 0 by being at the high spot. It should not, if this goes into a positive, which means higher than 0, you know you didn't have it in the highest spot. It appears I might be off a 0.5 so I'm going to re-zero that. So negative 40 comes back to 0. And I'm not getting any higher than 0. So now I know that these indicators have been zeroed out. So at this point, I am done with this particular jig. So we're going to take that off. We're going to leave this lock collar on the shaft. Leave it all the way at the bottom, keep this handle down. I'll talk about that in a second why. So we're going to place this tool off to the side. We're going to take this tool and we're going to pull these pins out and lock them for safety of the machine. If you notice, these are now retracted. When I take that vacuum drum and sit it down here, it's not going to be in the way. If you notice on this, there's an adjustment knob on the bottom here. You want to ensure this is tight. It was tight. I checked it before I started this, but I just want to talk about it right now. If you notice, there's also a mark right here. This is a spot that is a good spot for these things. It's about mid-travel for these indicators, so you're not going to bottom out either way when you're setting this up. You cannot move this after you have zeroed out your indicators. Once that's done, for the entire process while you're setting this vacuum drum up, this has to stay in that position. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this drum, we're going to put it on top of this shaft. The easiest way to do that is lift it up, center it. You might have to rotate it in order to get it to drop on. What I do is I place my hand underneath it just like this so that it doesn't drop all the way down and slam. You don't want that to happen. If you notice, the indicators are pulled back so they're not in the way. And I'm going to drop this down until it's all the way at the bottom. Now, this is at the bottom right here. And I can't rotate this all the way around because this handle's here. I'm not going to tighten this up at this point because I have to verify that these pins for the indicators line up at the correct spot of this particular drum. This is going to be an easy drum to verify because the holes right where it is wind up not touching this. But if I were to take this off, move this around now, I don't know if it shows up on the camera, but as I'm rotating this right here, you have to ensure that if you can't push this past, you don't want to ever really go backwards, you want to go forward, because the leading edge of this has a much less of an aggressive ramp up head, so you're not going to force those pins and snap them off. But you want to make sure these don't bottom out right here, so they're contacting and then they get pushed back. If you feel resistance where it's hitting it, you're going to have to move this back a little bit. So right now this seems to be okay, and I'm not coming in contact with the holes. So we're going to leave this right where it's at. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to raise this up just a hair. So I'm going to come to this collar, and I want to get this so that it's right in the middle of that hole and that hole. So I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm going to raise this up a little bit. I'm going to raise the collar as well. Sometimes it helps if you have a second person to help you with this. I've done this a few times, so I'm used to it. But at this point, I raised it up. I locked the lock collar in place. The lock collar is horizontal right here, so it's not going to get caught on this when you rotate it. If you dropped it down, when you try to rotate this, it'll get caught. Now I'm going to verify that these pins are not hitting the holes. And as you can see right now, it's hitting a hole, so that's no good. So I'm going to lower this down just a tad, and we're going to recheck it. That looks good on that pad, and this looks good on this pad. So we are now good as far as elevation goes for the vacuum drum. Okay, so I want to talk about the vacuum drum and its components. We have label stations. So the label station consists of a leading pad, the base area, I don't know the correct term for that, and a trailing pad. Then you have a dead space on a drum. So the label is always going to go from here to here. So this particular drum has 4 stations. You have one station here, one station here, one station here, and the final station. On those stations, you have the leading pad and the trailing pad. The leading pad has a area that has a ramp up, so the label will come to this point right here and hang off slightly and cover the rest of this leading pad. Then you can see, let me get a screwdriver so you can see this. There's a high spot on here. There's a high spot that starts here and ends right here. I drew a black mark right in the center of it. So on this particular pad, the high spot only goes from here to here, and that mark is to indicate the center of it. That's where we're going to be measuring, right in the center of that high spot. On the trailing pad, the high spot goes from here to the very edge. The center of that is right here where this black spot is. It happens to go right down the center here. And that's where we're going to measure on the trailing pad. Now, what we're looking for here is a 5 thousandths, that's 0.005 inch setting for these pads. What that means is we took that jig, this one right here, and we set it up so that we know that this is 2 millimeters away from the cutter drum. So this is going to wind up being 2 millimeters minus 0.005 thousandths away from the cutter drum. That'll allow us to have labels transferred from the cutter drum onto this vacuum drum. And this vacuum drum, when we set these pads up, we know that the glue roller is going to contact these by 5 thousandths because the glue roller has been set up previously. So at this point, what we're going to do is, if you notice, every single one of these is labeled. I'm going to start with number 1 just for consistency. So here's number 1. I'm bringing it around. Don't lean on this, by the way, because it'll affect your measurement. And I'm going to bring it so that, and I hope you can see this, the black mark is in line with the indicator. So I'm right in the middle of that high spot. And this was actually showing that this drum happens to be a little bit light. It's showing up at 3 thousandths, but it's even with the top and the bottom. So I'm going to wind up having to adjust number 1. We're going to check number 2. Number 2, get it right in the center where that black mark is, line it up with your pin, and it's at 4 thousandths, top and bottom. It is critical that you got to get this no more than a half of a thousandths out. If that 4, so you want 0.004, no more than 0.0045 is okay, or 0.0040 is okay. That last ditch is going to round up, but you always want to have it at 5. So this one's a little bit light as well. These are a half thousandths off, so we want it set to 5 thousandths, 0.005. So it's a half a thousandths off. We're okay here. Same thing with this one. That one looks good. Top is a little bit less than the bottom by 1 thousandths, but we're within the half of a thousandth. So this one's a half of a thousandths less, this one's a half of a thousandths more, but it's within the half of a thousandths spec, so we're okay. This one we have to adjust. We have to adjust just about every single one of them on this one. I'm not going to show every single adjustment, but we're going to go through and do one of them on this video. That's 3 thousandths, it should be 5. That's 3 thousandths, it should be 5. So at this point, we're going to start with number 1. The Allen wrench that I had showed you earlier right here. What we're going to do is go to this adjusting bolt right here and the one down at the bottom. We're going to loosen do these one at a time. So we want to increase this 2 thousandths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the top. It's now loose. I'm going to take my screwdriver and we're going to adjust this wheel right here. Now if I go in a counterclockwise direction or away from me at the top of this wheel, it's going to increase the pad coming out. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to move it a couple of knurls. This is a little bit difficult and tricky. Sometimes these don't want to move too easily. It helps if you take the screwdriver and lean it against the edge and use it like a fulcrum point. But I'm looking to move this thing a couple of lines on those knurls. Now every time you adjust this and I move it, I can't just move it right now without tightening that bolt and come back here and measure it. And I'll show you why. Right now I'm at 5 thousandths, but watch what happens when I tighten this bolt. It moved slightly, so I got to make sure that once I make my adjustment, I tighten it right back up. See, it dropped down below 4.5 I'm at right now. I'm going to leave that there because that's a 0.5 thousandths off, and now I'm going to go to the bottom. That top one might come in once I move the bottom. So now I'm loosening up the bottom bolt. Sometimes you can move these by hand, sometimes not. In this case I can't, so I'm going to use the screwdriver. This is why you want the long screwdriver. And I'm going to move it a couple of lines just like I did the top. I'm going to tighten it down. And now I'm going to check. Okay. So I moved the top and the bottom about the same. My bottom is now at 5 thousandths. I'm right in the center. My top is reading 5 thousandths or 4.5. So right now we are within a 0.5 thousandths between the top and the bottom, and we're about 5 thousandths out. So that one is now completed. I'm going to move on to number 2 station, which is the trailing, just so I can show you a second one. So this one, the top one, happens to be at just about 5 thousandths. We're going to leave the top one alone. We're going to concentrate on that bottom one. So I'm going to loosen the bottom one. Oh, I forgot something very important here. I apologize. The one thing you have to do when you put this on, and what may account for this thing being slightly off, is you always have to tighten this, lock it down. So I guarantee you that now that I just did that, I'm probably going to go back and look at some of these settings and they're going to be off. So I'm going to go through this thing again. I'm going to start with number 1. Okay, so here's number 1. This one's a little bit high. And that's the difference between this thing being locked down and not being locked down. Number 2, that's looking good. Bottom one is a little bit light. Oh, that's at 4.5. There we go. Number 3, it's at where it needs to be. Number 4, a little light on the bottom. Number 5 is a 0.5 thousandths off. So number 5, we're looking good too. Number 6 is still light, so we got to come back to number 6. Number 7 is light, we got to come back to 7. Number 8 is light as well. So my point is, always make sure this is locked down. What will happen is If it's not locked down, allow that drum to move back and forth, and you'll just keep chasing measurements. So I'm going to do one more, just so everybody can see how it's done again. We did number 1. That was good. Number 2 is good. Number 3 is good. I think it was number 6. Number 4 is a little light on the bottom. No, that's okay. Number 5. That's good. Yeah, it's number 6. So we'll adjust number 6. Okay. Start with the top again. This one's not going to take much. So, peek it into this hole. I'm going to lock this down after I adjusted that knurled screw. I'm going to take a measurement again. So we're at 5 thousandths, 4.5. Yeah, 5 thousandths. So now we're going to do the bottom. Same thing. This isn't going to take much, because you're only 1/1000th off. But 1/1000ths in that machine makes a big difference with these ceramic pads. I think I moved that two lines on the knurl. I'm not 100% sure. We'll check it after I lock it down. And then if we have to adjust it again, we will. Alright. What you'll notice is when you move one or the other, it usually affects the opposite end. So this was at 5 thousandths before I moved the bottom. The bottom was at 4 thousandths. Since I moved the bottom, it brought that top one out 1/2 thousandths. So I'm at 5.5 thousandths, which is 1/2 thousandths out from 5 thousandths. So we're going to leave that there. But I'm going to adjust the rest of these off the camera. But you now see how to adjust these pads. It is critical that you get within 1/2 thousandths within 5. So your range is going to be 0.0045 to 0.0055. Any more than that deviation, and you're going to have inconsistent glue patterns from pad to pad on that same drum. Thank you for watching.